The wall came down at noon. Silas Holloway heard it before he saw it, a grinding, stone-swallowing roar that shook the dust from his lute strings and sent his mule, Pepper, lurching sideways into the ditch at the edge of the Ashford Road. He grabbed the reins, steadied the animal, and looked east toward the smoke-black silhouette of Redgate Fort rising against a sky the color of old bruises. The southern tower had collapsed. He could see it settling into rubble even from 2 miles out, a slow exhalation of stone and mortar that carried on the wind as gray powder. He had heard about the siege at the last trading post, 3 days back. The Thornwall Company, mercenaries out of Vorath, armed with iron-capped rams and a grievance against the Orc garrison holding Redgate, had been battering the fort for 11 days. The fort's garrison was small. 42, the rumor said. 42 orcs holding a stone box against 400 men with coin in their pockets and cruelty in their contracts. Silas had thought when he heard it that 42 was not nearly enough. He had played a song that evening for the traders at the post, something old and mournful about a battle that no one won, and a woman in the back had wept into her ale, and he had felt the particular hollow feeling he always felt after singing true things. He was not a soldier. He was not a rescuer. He was a wandering musician who had been traveling the border country for 3 years with a lute, a mule, a bedroll, and a leather satchel that held 37 copper coins, a half-eaten wheel of hard cheese, and a handwritten book of songs he had collected from every village and way station between Coldmere and the Ashford frontier. He was 28 years old, lean and dark-haired, with calloused fingers from the strings and a face that people described, when they were being kind, as honest, and when they were being less kind, as forgettable. He had a habit of looking at things too long and speaking too little, and then speaking all at once when the silence finally broke him. He was, in most measurable ways, an ordinary man, but he turned Pepper east toward the smoke. He could not have said precisely why, only that there was a sound under the collapse of the tower carrying faint and sharp on the wind, and it was not quite like any sound he had heard in his 3 years of wandering. Not screaming, not the clash of iron, something rower. Something that felt, absurdly, like a single voice refusing to stop. He found her a quarter-mile from the broken gate. She was standing in the churned field between the fort's collapsed outer wall and the tree line, and she was the only one standing. Around her, spread across 50 yards of mud and broken timber and the remnants of the Thornwall Company's forward camp, there were men down, some groaning, some not, and the wreckage of what looked like a furious, terrible one-woman storm had passed through the camp and left this in its wake. Overturned fire pits, a siege ram's chain harness in pieces, 2 tents collapsed, 3 mercenaries unconscious in a heap against a split fence post. She stood at the center of it with an axe in her right hand and a broken shield grip in her left, and she was breathing so hard that he could hear it from 30 yards out. Her armor orc-worked leather, dark and close-fitted, studded with bronze rivets down the chest and waist, lacing tight at the sides to show the powerful lines of her torso, was torn at the shoulder. Her dark green skin was streaked with dust and dried blood and the smeared gray of collapsed stone. Her hair was black and thick, pulled into a knot that had mostly come loose, and there were strands of it matted to her face, and she was not pushing them away. Her tusks curved upward from a strong jaw, elegant in their own way, and her amber eyes, when they found him through the settling dust, were so incandescent with rage that Silas felt his throat close. She looked like something the mountain had produced in a fury and sent out to walk among men. She looked like she had survived something that should have killed her and was angry at it for trying. He stopped Pepper at 30 yards. He did not run. He did not raise his hands. He sat on the mule and looked at her, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he reached into his satchel, unhurried, and pulled out his waterskin. He leaned forward and held it out toward her, arm extended across the space between them. It was a dumb thing to do, probably. She could close 30 yards in 4 strides with that axe. He knew that. He was not stupid, but the rage in her eyes was wrapped around something else, something she would not acknowledge, and he recognized it the way he recognized the hollow space in a true song. She was running on nothing. She had burned through everything she had in that storm of violence, and what was left was the shape of a woman too proud to admit she was about to fall. She looked at the waterskin. She looked at him. He did not move, did not smile, did not speak, did not pull it back. Just held it there steady. Ursa Mudborn crossed the distance in 4 strides, snatched the waterskin from his hand, drank from it in 3 long pulls, and handed it back without looking at him. She turned away from him and looked at the ruined gate. Her jaw was set. Her breathing was slowing. He said nothing for a full minute. He just put the waterskin back in his satchel and let the silence hold. Then he said very quietly, "Is anyone else alive in there?" Her voice, when it came, was low and rough, like gravel being turned by a river. 6, he said. "Can they walk?" A pause. 2 can. He looked at the tree line, then back at the fort. He could hear distant voices from the south, the main body of the Thornwall Company, regrouping after whatever she had done to their forward camp. They would come back. They would come back with more men and considerably less tolerance for surprises. "All right," Silas said. He swung down from Pepper. "Let's get them out." Ursa Mudborn turned and looked at him then, really looked, with those amber eyes gone from incandescent to something sharper and more calculating. She looked at the loot strapped to his back. She looked at the mule. She looked at his hands, which were not a fighter's hands. She looked at his face, which was ordinary and calm and maybe slightly too stubborn for good sense. "You are a musician," she said. It was not a question. It was not an insult. It was a statement that carried inside it a very large unspoken end. "Yes," he said. "I am also someone who is helping you move your people out of that ruin before those mercenaries come back. We can discuss my professional qualifications later." He walked past her toward the broken gate, and after 2 seconds he heard her follow. She did not say thank you. He did not expect her to. They got the 6 survivors out in 22 minutes. 2 walked. One was carried across Ursa's shoulders like he weighed nothing. A young male orc with a deep gash across his head who kept saying the same phrase over and over in the orcish tongue. Silas carried another across his own shoulders. A female orc, smaller and lighter, who was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and wet. He was not strong by any warrior's measure, but he was wiry and stubborn, and he simply kept moving, one step after another, until they were through the tree line and into the shadows of the wood. 2 more orcs were half carried by the 2 walking survivors. One could not be moved. Ursa came out of the ruin last alone, and she did not have that orc with her, and she did not speak of it, and Silas did not ask. They pushed 2 miles into the forest before she stopped them. She knew this would. That was clear. She moved through it without hesitation, found a deer trail, followed it to a creek, crossed the creek, and then led them up a slope to a shelf of rock that overhung a hollow hidden by old ferns. It was a good place to hide. Someone had thought about it. "You knew this ground before the siege," Silas said, not accusingly. He was helping settle the unconscious female orc against the rock wall, balling his bedroll under her head. "I grew up north of here," Ursa said. She was checking her warrior's wounds with brisk, impersonal hands. "I knew this country before those mercenaries were hired to ruin it." "Why were they hired?" Her eyes moved to him and stayed there a beat. "Because the lords of the eastern ridge decided that 42 orcs holding a useful fort were more inconvenient than profitable, and because the Thornwall Company does not ask many questions for enough gold. So they just killed everyone who wouldn't leave. They tried." She said it flatly, without dramatics, as if the enormity of what had been attempted and what she had done to partially stop it was simply a fact of the world she inhabited. "I was on the wall when the tower fell. I came down into the camp because I saw their forward commander and I wanted him." "Did you get him?" A pause. "I got 3 of his lieutenants." Silas absorbed this. He looked at the broken bronze-studded leather of her shoulder armor where the strap had torn through, and at the gash underneath it, which was not as shallow as she was pretending. "That needs cleaning," he said. "I have done it. You've smeared it. There's grit in it." He opened his satchel and produced a small square of linen and his waterskin again. "May I?" She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes that was not rage and not calculation, something more complicated and less guarded, and then she sat down on the rock beside him and turned her shoulder toward him without speaking. He cleaned the wound carefully. She did not flinch once, not even when he worked grit loose from the deepest part of it. He tied the linen tight, made it a proper bandage. His hands were steady. "You're good at that," she said. "My mother was a healer's assistant," he said. "I patched up a lot of her patients when she was tired, and I've patched my own hands up enough times." He held up his left hand, where the lute strings had worked old lines into his fingertips over 10 years of playing. "Musicians bleed more than people think." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but something. "What is your name?" she said. "Silas Holloway, wandering musician, general nuisance, and apparently also a field medic today. Yours, Ursa Mudborn." He turned it over. "Mudborn, is that a clan name or did someone give it to you?" Her expression tightened fractionally. "My clan name. The Mudborn clan held the southern delta for 3 generations. Before. He did not push it. He knew what before meant in this part of the world in this year, with these mercenaries working for these lords. He tied off the bandage and sat back. Around them, the 5 surviving orcs had settled into the hollow. The one with the head wound had stopped repeating his phrase and was now unconscious, which Silas was cautiously choosing to interpret as sleep rather than the alternative. The female orc on his bedroll was breathing more steadily. The walking wounded were tending each other. Ursa watched all of them, and even in stillness she held herself like someone who had not yet allowed herself to stop. "You should eat something," Silas said. He cut a wedge of the hard cheese and held it out. She looked at the cheese, she looked at him. "You keep handing me things," she said, not hostile, curious in the way a very wary creature is curious. "You keep being in a state where you need them," he said reasonably. She took the cheese. She ate it. He cut a wedge for himself and they sat in the fern-scented dark of the overhang and ate and said nothing for a while, and for some reason the nothing felt more companionable than Silas had expected. Over the next hours, he played quietly, very quietly, with the lute's volume dropped to almost nothing, pressing his palm against the strings between chords to keep the sound inside the hollow. He had found over years of playing that music worked on people the way water worked on dry ground. It did not force anything. It just opened cracks that were already there. The orcs who were awake grew still. The one with the head wound breathed more evenly. The female orc on the bedroll opened her eyes and looked at the canopy of rock above her and did not look afraid. Ursa sat with her back against the far wall of the hollow, one knee raised, watching him play. She watched his hands most of all. The way they moved on the strings was different from the way they moved on everything else, deliberate, but easy. Like the music was a language his body spoke more naturally than his mouth did. "What song is that?" she asked eventually. "It doesn't have a name, I wrote it," he kept playing. "I write most of what I play. Collected songs from other people are good, but they fit other people's stories. This one is mine." "What is it about?" He played 2 more chords, thinking about whether to answer honestly. He usually didn't. It was easier to deflect. "But something about this hollow, this company, this particular woman and the particular way she had drunk from his waterskin without thanks, and sat down for bandaging without thanks, and eaten the cheese without thanks, but had also not left, which felt like its own kind of answer, made him decide on honest. "Being in a lot of different places and never quite being in any of them," he said. "Moving through the world like you're looking for something without knowing what you're looking for." She was quiet. Then, "I know what I'm looking for." "What?" "I'm looking for the man who hired the Thornwall Company." Her voice was measured, controlled. "He has a name, Duran Asheville. He holds the Eastern Ridge and 3 of the old Mudborn Delta lands. He signed the contract that killed 36 of my people today." She said 36 without inflection, but the number sat in the air between them like a stone dropped into water. "I intend to make that difficult for him." "That's not a small thing," Silas said carefully. "No," she agreed. "It is not." She met his eyes across the space of the hollow. "You don't have to be part of it. You handed me water and you helped carry my people to safety and you played a song that made Vorn stop seizing. That is more than anyone else offered today. You have no debt to me." "I know I don't," he said. "What's the plan, generally speaking?" A long look. "Why?" "Because I'm going to ask you to come to Ashford Town with me tomorrow to resupply and find a healer for your wounded, and I want to know whether you're the kind of person who has a plan or the kind who runs on rage, because one of those is safer company than the other." Something flared in her amber eyes. "I survived 11 days in that fort on rage. I took out their forward camp on rage. I carried 3 people out of rubble on rage." "I know," Silas said. "I saw. It was extraordinary." "I'm asking about tomorrow." The flare stayed, and then it bent, and she exhaled through her nose, and the corner of her mouth did the thing again that was not quite a smile. "I have a plan," she said. "Good," said Silas Holloway. "Then yes, I'm probably part of it." The walk to Ashford Town took the better part of a day. Ursa had assessed her surviving warriors. 4 were walking wounded. 1, the young male she had carried, Vorn, needed real medical care, and had made the brutal and necessary decision to send 3 of the 4 walking warriors north to a Mudborn encampment 2 days away, where they would be safer than in a human border town. She and the oldest of them, a big scarred female named Breck, stayed with Vorn and Silas. The female orc Silas had carried had recovered enough by morning to walk with the northern group. Pepper carried Vorn, who was drifting in and out of consciousness but no longer seizing. Ursa walked on Silas's left and Breck walked on Silas's right, which meant Silas was flanked by 2 warrior orcs, and leading a mule with a third unconscious one draped across it, walking into a human border town, which was, he reflected, not the strangest situation his wandering had put him in, but was certainly in the top 5. Ashford Town was a rough-edged settlement of maybe 800 souls. Timber frame buildings along a main road cut through the mud, a market square with permanent stalls, a tavern called the Hinge that had been operating under 5 different names over the years, and currently served the best bone broth in the border country, a healer's house at the north end, a blacksmith, a tanner, a trading post, and a kind of loose rotating garrison of guards who were paid by the local merchants, and whose enthusiasm for their duties varied enormously based on who was paying that week. The stairs started at the edge of town. Silas had expected it. Ursa had clearly expected it. She walked with her chin up and her shoulders back and her amber eyes level and forward, and the quality of her bearing communicated very clearly that she was aware of every stair and was extending to each one exactly the amount of concern she would extend to weather. Breck radiated a similar energy, though with a more specific flavor of warning, like a very large dog who is choosing, moment by moment, to remain calm. The first real friction came at the market square. A stocky man in a merchant's vest stepped into the road and held up his hand like he had authority over it. "These orcs have business here," he demanded, addressing Silas as if Ursa and Breck were not capable of speech. Silas stopped. He turned and looked at the man with the particular quality of attention he used when he was deciding whether to be polite or to be pointed. He decided on pointed. "That one on the mule needs a healer and the other 2 need a meal and a night out of the weather," Silas said, keeping his voice pleasant and carrying. The square had that particular quality of crowded public space where everyone was pretending not to watch while watching extremely carefully. "If you know of a town ordinance against that, I'd be interested to hear it. If you're just filling time, I'd respectfully suggest you find something else to fill it with." The merchant's jaw went tight. He looked at Ursa. She looked back at him with total calm, which Silas had already learned was somehow more alarming than aggression. The merchant stepped aside. Silas kept walking. He did not look at Ursa, but a second later he felt her hand, briefly, touch the back of his shoulder, just the lightest press, 2 fingers gone immediately. It was not gratitude in any elaborate sense. It was just acknowledgement. He kept his face neutral and kept walking. The healer at the north end was an old woman named Pembroke who had been treating orc and human alike for 40 years because, as she explained to Silas while she cleaned Vorn's head wound with practiced hands, she had a practical view of the matter. Pain is pain, she said. Blood is blood. I didn't train this long to make decisions about which body I care to use my knowledge on. She charged them a fair rate, which Silas paid with most of his 37 copper coins, and she let them use her back room for the night. Silas played at the Hinge Tavern that evening for his supper, and enough coin to replace what he'd spent at the Healer's. He was good enough at it that the room quieted when he started and stayed quiet, and the innkeep put out the word that the musician was worth the walk. And by the second hour there were people standing in the doorway who hadn't found seats. And by the end of the third hour, he had 22 silver coins in the bowl at his feet, and a warm bone broth in his hands, and a plate of hard bread and roasted root vegetables, which he carried back to the Healer's house. Ursa was sitting outside the Healer's door in the dark when he came back. She had cleaned up mostly. The dust was gone, and someone had given her a damp cloth for her face and hands. She had relaced the shoulder of her leather armor as well as she could with the strap torn, and she looked, in the light from the Healer's single window, less like the end of a storm and more like the storm itself, contained, still powerful, watching the night. He sat down beside her on the step and set the food between them. She looked at the plate. She looked at him. "Stop," he said. "Stop what?" "Looking at everything I give you like you're waiting for me to want something from it." A long silence. Then quietly, "People always want something." "Sure," he said. "I want you to eat so you don't fall over because you've been running on nothing but fury for 3 days, and I find that I've invested enough in your continued survival that I'd like it to continue." He picked up a piece of bread and took a bite. "See, honest. Now eat." She ate. He ate. The night was cool and smelled of wood smoke and river mud and the particular sharp tang of a frontier town after dark. "How much did you play for?" she asked. "Enough to cover the Healer and buy some traveling supplies tomorrow and still have something left. I'll pay you back. Don't worry about it." "I'll pay you back," she repeated, and the tone of it made clear this was not an offer but a statement of future fact, and arguing was irrelevant. "All right," he said. She ate for a moment longer and then said without looking at him, "You played a long time in there. 3 hours. I heard it from here." A pause. "It was good." "Thank you," he said, and meant it, and did not dress it in anything extra. She turned and looked at him then, in the direct way she had that made most people uncomfortable, that quality of attention that did not soften its edges. He met it without blinking. She had been looked at with fear and disgust and wariness all day in this town, and something about a man who simply looked back steadily and did not need to armor himself against her gaze seemed to catch her off balance, even now, even after everything. "Why are you still here?" she said. "You could have left us at the tree line. You could have put us at the Healer's door and gone back to the tavern and not come out until morning." "I could have," he agreed. "Then why?" He thought about it genuinely, the way he thought about a song that wasn't finished yet feeling for the shape of it, the honest note underneath. "Because," he said, "you didn't refuse the water. And I figured anyone who survives 11 days under siege, and then walks through a front camp like a force of nature, and then still has the self-possession to drink water from a stranger's skin slowly enough not to choke on it, that person is worth knowing." Ursa Mudborn looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then she turned back to the dark street. But the corner of her mouth did the thing again, and this time it went further, and he got a real edge of a smile from her, brief and reluctant and fierce, and more luminous than anything the window behind them was producing. "I did not drink it slowly," she said. "I drank it in 3 seconds. You kept your composure," he said. "That's the point." Said Ursa. He took that as a victory. In the morning, Vorn was stable and lucid. Breck reported the word from town. The Thornwall Company had regrouped but had not pursued north. Apparently the forward camp's destruction had been humiliating enough to make them cautious. But Duran Asheville's men had been seen in the market 2 days ago, and Silas had picked up chatter in the tavern the night before that suggested Asheville was making moves on several properties east of Redgate, consolidating a claim to the whole corridor now that the fort was rubble. Ursa listened to all of this with her arms crossed, and her face settled into a kind of cold, strategic precision that Silas found both impressive and slightly alarming. "We go to Ironbell," she said. Ironbell was a town 40 miles east, bigger than Ashford, with a proper court magistrate and a documented land registry office that held deeds and contracts going back 60 years. The Mudborn clan's claim to the southern delta was registered there. Silas knew this because Ursa had said it, and he believed her, and he also knew that a registered deed in the hands of an orc woman who had just survived a siege while the man claiming her land was paying mercenaries to clear it was an interesting legal situation, and the world being what it was, interesting legal situations often turned very quickly into dangerous ones. "I'm going to Ironbell anyway," Silas said. "There's a festival there in 6 days. Market and music both." "I was planning on it." Breck looked at him with the particular expression of someone revising their assessment upward. "We'll travel together," Ursa said. "It was not a question." "Obviously," Silas said. They left Ashford town at first light, Vorn upright on Pepper now though moving carefully, Breck a quiet solid presence at the rear. The road east was wide and well-traveled, lined on either side with the gray-green scrub of the border country, and the morning was clean and cool, and Silas played as he walked, quietly, because walking and playing was something he had gotten very good at over 3 years of road, and it kept his hands busy and the miles shorter. He played the nameless song he'd played in the hollow, and then an old border tune about a river that flooded its banks every spring and never apologized for it. And then he started playing something he had never played before, something that was building itself out of the past 2 days, out of broken stone and amber eyes, and the weight of 36 dead, and the particular quality of silence a very strong person makes when they are refusing to let you see them cracking. Ursa walked beside him. She did not speak for the first hour. Then she said, "Is that new?" "Yes," he said. "What is it about?" He played another measure before answering. "I'm not sure yet," she nodded. Like that was an acceptable and intelligible answer, which from most musicians' perspective it was. The road was 4 days from Ashford to Ironbell by normal walking pace. They made good time the first day, camping in a stone-walled shepherd's shelter they found 2 miles off the road, which had a functioning roof and a fire ring, and enough dry wood stacked in the corner that someone charitable had left it for exactly this situation. Silas cooked. He was not a great cook, but he was a competent one. He'd been feeding himself on the road for 3 years, and he had trading post beans and dried meat, and a handful of wild herbs he'd pulled from the roadside and salt, and he made a thick, hot stew that everyone ate in the kind of concentrated silence that meant it was working. After Breck and Vorn settled to sleep, and Silas and Ursa sat by the dying fire, and he pulled out his book of songs and showed it to her, because she had been glancing at it all evening from the corner of her eye with an expression that carefully did not look curious, which meant she was very curious. She held it with careful hands, big, strong hands that were nonetheless deft with the worn pages. She could read. He hadn't been sure and hadn't wanted to assume, and felt a small, quiet pleasure at finding out. "These are in 5 different languages," she said. 6, if you count the River Orc dialect, which my transcription of is not very accurate. He pointed to a page. "I got that one from an old man in a fairy town on the Greenwater. He sang it 3 times and I wrote it down phonetically and I can reproduce it, but I'm not sure I understand it. This word," she said, tapping a line, "it means belongs to the river." She glanced up. "The full phrase means everything good belongs to the river, which is a very old saying about giving up what you love." "Ah," said Silas, "that makes the song significantly sadder." "Yes," she said. They sat with that for a moment. She had not moved away from him since she'd taken the book, and they were close enough that he was aware of the warmth of her, which was more than a human's warmth, orc kind running naturally warmer, and the specific scent of her, which was smoke and iron and something darker and cleaner, like river rock after rain. He was not, he realized, unaware of her as a woman. He had been trying to be for practical reasons and had been mostly succeeding, but in the firelight, with her dark hair half loose and her amber eyes moving over his handwriting with that careful, intelligent attention, the effort required increased substantially. She looked up and caught him looking. A beat. His ears did not quite heat, but they wanted to. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Good night, Ursa." She looked at him for one more second, and that complicated thing moved behind her eyes again, and then she handed the book back and settled against the wall. "Good night, musician." He was not sure he slept immediately, but eventually he did. The second day of travel brought them to a crossroads village called Thornhitch, which had a single inn and a noisy market. And Silas played at the market for 2 hours while Ursa and Breck sold some salvaged bronze fittings from Ursa's armor at the smith's and bought travel food and a decent length of leather lace for the shoulder repair. The market crowd was mixed humans and a scatter of orcs, mostly traders, 1 or 2 with the marks of the northern clans, and no one gave them particular trouble, though Silas caught a group of men watching Ursa from the corner of the square with expressions that he did not like, and he finished his playing sooner than he'd planned and drifted over to stand near her, which was probably not protection in any genuine military sense but felt like the right thing to do. She noticed. She said nothing, but when they left the market square she walked close enough to him that their arms brushed twice, and she did not move away from the contact. On the road out of Thornhitch, with the afternoon turning long and amber, Breck dropped back to walk with Vorn, and Ursa and Silas walked ahead, alone together for the first time. "Tell me about the plan," Silas said. "The actual plan. You mentioned Iron Bell and the deed registry." Ursa walked for a moment with her eyes on the horizon. "The Mudborn clan holds a registered deed to 43 acres of the southern delta, including the water rights. It is 38 years old and was ratified by the Ashford Treaty. Durin Ashville cannot legally claim that land while the deed stands, but deeds can disappear from registries when the right people are paid. So you need to get to the registry before his people do." "I need to do more than that," she said. "I need to file a formal complaint of aggressive dispossession with the magistrate's court at Iron Bell, with witnesses and a documented account of the siege, and I need to do it while I have 5 living survivors of the fort and a musician who saw the aftermath, and before Asheville's lawyers arrive." She glanced at him. "That is the plan." "I can be a witness," he said. "I know. Is that why you let me come?" She was quiet for a moment too long. Then, "No," she said. "I let you come because you handed me water after a siege and helped carry my people out of rubble without being asked and played music that made Vorn stop seizing, and I found that I wanted you near." She said it directly, without softening it, but the last words had a kind of gruff difficulty to them, as if she was unaccustomed to saying true things that made her vulnerable, and was doing it anyway because she had decided honesty was worth the exposure. He felt the words settle over him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Good," he said, "because I wanted to be near. I wanted to be near from the moment I saw you standing in the middle of that camp with an axe and about 2 minutes of reserves left. I had more than 2 minutes. Ursa." "Perhaps 2 minutes," she allowed. He laughed. It surprised him, the laugh full and genuine from the chest. She looked at him sidelong, and the fierce, reluctant smile came again, fuller this time, and he saw the full curve of it and the way her tusks made it strange and asymmetric and vivid and entirely her own, and he thought, with a clarity that struck him like a chord resolution after a long, unresolved phrase, "Oh, there it is." They camped that night in the open, in a dry hollow beside the road, under a sky that was furiously full of stars. Breck slept heavily. Vorn slept lightly but slept. Silas lay on his back and looked at the stars and listened to the night sounds and did not sleep, and after a while he heard Ursa shift from her position across the fire, and a moment later she was lying on the ground beside him, close, not touching, both of them looking up at the same stars. "The Mudborn name comes from the Delta," she said quietly. "My grandmother's grandmother took it." She said the clan was born from the mud of the Great Flood, when the river came over its banks and remade everything, and everything alive after it was made from that same clay. She paused. I used to think it meant something humble. Now I think it means something stubborn, born from the flood and still here. Still here, Silas echoed. Her hand, resting between them on the dry ground, turned palm up. He looked at it. He put his hand in it. Her fingers closed around his, and they stayed like that, not looking at each other, both looking at the sky, and the stars were very many and very cold and very beautiful. He fell asleep with her hand in his and woke the same way. The third day brought them to the edge of the Iron Bell Road, which was a wider, better-maintained route that fed the eastern market town from 3 directions. Traffic increased: wagons, riders, the occasional walking merchant with a pack mule, and on one occasion a carriage with armed outriders that passed them at speed and covered them all in road dust. Silas shielded his loot. Vorn coughed. Breck swore in 2 languages. Ursa watched the carriage go and then said, very quietly, "That was an Asheville crest." Silas turned. The carriage was already rounding the far bend. "How certain are you?" "Certain," she said. Her voice had gone to the flat, precise register he now knew meant she was controlling something strong. Gray and red, 2 crossed towers, that's his family crest. She looked at him. "They're ahead of us." "Then we move faster," Silas said. He looked at Vorn. "Can you ride at speed?" Vorn, who had more in him now than he had 3 days ago, set his jaw and said, "Yes." They pushed hard the rest of the day and into the early dark. Silas stopped playing. He walked, quick-stepped, watching the road ahead and thinking about what came next. When they stopped briefly at a roadside well to water pepper and eat cold travel food standing up, Ursa came and stood beside him, and he felt her lean against him, shoulder to shoulder, just briefly, just long enough to say something without words, and then she straightened and kept moving. They reached Iron Bell's outer gate as the torches were being lit. The town was genuinely a town: cobblestone main streets, a proper stone guild hall, a magistrate's court with a brass seal above the door, market squares that sprawled 3 blocks in 2 directions, and at least 4 taverns visible from the gate alone. The festival decorations were already up, garlands of dried flowers and painted boards advertising competitions and musician slots and market stalls. Silas knew Iron Bell. He'd played here twice before. He knew the innkeep at the Ironbark House would give him credit on a room, and he knew where the magistrate's court opened in the morning and who the clerk was, and he knew which tavern had the biggest stage and the best acoustics and the most crowded nights during festival week, which meant the most coin in the bowl. He also knew, as they walked through the gate, and the gate guards gave their group a long assessment, that time was now the primary enemy. The Asheville carriage had at least 2 hours on them. They went first to the Ironbark House, where Silas's credit was good, and the innkeep, a red-cheeked woman named Hannah, took in the group with pragmatic efficiency and gave them 2 rooms without any of the theater that Ashford Town's merchant had offered. Vorn was put to bed. Breck took up her customary position at a door, this time literally in the chair beside the room's entrance, immovable. Silas and Ursa went to the street. "The court opens at 7th bell," she said. "It's past 2nd bell now. So we have 5 hours," he said. "The Asheville men will be at the registry tonight or at dawn. Can we get to the registry tonight?" "The registry closes at sunset. It's already sunset," he thought. "There might be a night clerk, for emergency filings. It's an old provision in the court charter. I played at the magistrate's anniversary dinner 2 years ago, and he mentioned it because he was proud of the town's legal infrastructure and slightly drunk." Ursa looked at him with an expression that said she was recalibrating again, upward. "You know the magistrate." "I know his anniversary dinner crowd," Silas said. "But yes, he'll know my face. Come on." He took her through the back streets of Iron Bell at a pace that was nearly a run, leading with the confidence of someone who had memorized a town over 2 visits and trusted his spatial memory. Twice he was wrong and had to double back. Once he picked up the street by a distinctive ironwork gate that he had described in his notebook after the anniversary dinner. Ursa kept pace without a word, though when he had to stop, and think she put her hand on his arm and waited, steady, trusting. The registry office was in the back of the court building, accessible through a side alley. The door was shut but not dark. A single lamp burned in the lower left window. Silas knocked again. A voice from inside said something irritable. He said through the door, "I need an emergency night filing under the old court charter provision. I have a witness to a land dispossession, a deed holder, and a documented account of a violent siege. The opposing party has already arrived in town. I need a clerk." A long pause, then bolts. The night clerk was a thin young man named Weld who had an ink-stained face and the energy of someone who had been doing this job for exactly 3 months and was genuinely uncertain whether tonight fell within his actual mandate, but who ultimately, when Ursa put the original deed on his desk, she had carried it sewn into the lining of her leather armor the entire time. A small roll of aged vellum that she produced from a tear in the inner lining with hands that were very still sat down and began writing. They were in that office for 2 hours. Silas was a witness. He gave his account of the siege's aftermath, the dead, the living, the destroyed fort, the Thornwall Company's camp, and the specific date and time. And he gave his full name and the fact that he was a traveling musician with no stake in the land claim, which made him a clean witness. Breck, sent for by a note passed through Hannah the innkeep's runner, arrived half an hour in and added her account. Ursa gave her account last, and she gave it in the formal registrant style, third person, dates, locations, specific numbers, and it was devastating. Every detail of 11 days recorded with the precision of someone who had made herself witness to it all and had not allowed herself the mercy of not seeing. 37 dead by the time the wall fell. One orc whose name Silas still did not know, left behind in the ruin. The Thornwall Company's commanding officer's name and the names of his 3 dead lieutenants, all of which she remembered exactly. The name Duran Asheville and the fact of his recorded contract, which she knew because she had seen the contract herself. It had been delivered to the fort's commander 8 days before the siege began, as a final demand to vacate. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Young Weld was pale and writing fast. The emergency filing was sealed and stamped with the court's night seal at nearly the second-to-last hour before midnight. They walked out of the court building into the cool night, and Silas exhaled a breath he had apparently been holding for approximately 2 hours, and Ursa stopped on the stone step and put her face up toward the sky and closed her eyes, and he watched her do it, and saw what it looked like when someone who had been holding weight for 11 days was permitted by circumstances to set it down, just for a moment. He said nothing. He just stood next to her on the step. After a while she opened her eyes and looked at him and said, "You knew about the night clerk provision." "I remembered it," he said. "From a dinner conversation. Seemed worth remembering." "You remembered it," she repeated, and the way she said it, like the accumulation of all the small things he had turned out to know and do, was making its way through some calculation she'd been running since the day they met, and was tipping something, was very quiet and very intent. He reached up before he quite decided to, and tucked a strand of her hair back from her face, carefully, with 2 fingers along her jaw. She went very still. Not stiffening away from it, still in the way of something that has been touched gently when it did not expect to be, and is adjusting to the surprise of not minding. "Ursa," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have to play a festival tomorrow and the next day and possibly the day after that to make enough money to eat for the next month. But after that, she said, "we go to the Eastern Ridge." And then she reached up and took his hand from her jaw and held it, his hand in both of hers, turning it over like she was reading it. His wandering musician's hand, calloused and ink-stained and ordinary. "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. She kissed him then. She was the one who closed the distance, direct, deliberate, the way she did everything, the way she had drunk from his waterskin and eaten his cheese and laid her hand palm up under the stars, The way she had filed a legal claim in a night clerk's office on 2 hours sleep after surviving a siege. With full intention. Without hesitation. The kiss was not soft, exactly, but it was careful in the way of something strong being handled with care. And it was warm, the warmth that orcs ran hotter than humans, and it tasted of the road and the night and something that was simply and entirely her. He kissed her back with everything he had in him, which was not a soldier's strength or a lord's wealth or any particular standing in the world, but was genuine and whole and entirely meant. When they broke apart, she was looking at him with those amber eyes at close range, and they were not incandescent now. They were simply steady, warm, like banked fire that has stopped needing to burn the world down and started needing only to warm one particular place. "Good," she said quietly, like it was a verdict. He laughed again, that full surprised laugh, and she smiled, the full fierce asymmetric real smile, and they stood on the court steps in the Iron Bell night, and did not immediately go back to the inn. The festival was 3 days. Silas played. He played with everything he had, with the particular sharpened quality of performance that comes when you are happy and do not quite know how to hold it except to turn it into music. He played the old songs and the collected border songs and the nameless song about moving through the world looking for something, and on the 3rd night he played the new one, the one he'd been building since the afternoon after the siege, from broken stone and amber eyes and 36 dead, and the weight of a woman who would not crack. He had given it words now, and a structure, and it was good. It was possibly the best thing he had ever written. When he finished it, the room at the Ironbark Tavern was very quiet for 3 seconds, and then the sound that replaced the silence was the kind of appreciation that does not need to be performed because it is simply involuntary, and he sat with it, and across the crowded room, leaning in the doorway with her arms crossed and her amber eyes steady on him. Ursa met his gaze and gave him the slow, deliberate nod of someone who knows exactly what they have just heard. After the festival's 2nd night, they had a private moment that the world did not need to see in its details, only that it was warm and fierce and honest, and that she reached for him first, and that for the first time in a long while, Silas Holloway did not feel like a man moving through places without quite arriving in them. He felt, quite precisely, arrived. On the 4th morning, the magistrate's court opened its regular session, and they were in the gallery when the Asheville solicitor's attempt to file a secondary deed claim predated, suspiciously convenient, was reviewed alongside the emergency filing from 4 nights prior, and the magistrate, a heavy-set man with reading glasses and a dry manner who did indeed recognize Silas from the anniversary dinner, and gave him a small, surprised nod from the bench, ruled that the emergency filing took precedence, and that the Mudborn deed was established and valid, and that any further attempt to dispute it would need to proceed through the full court process with proper standing, which, given the documented account of the siege, would be an extremely interesting legal challenge for anyone to attempt. The Asheville solicitor looked like he had eaten something bad and needed to leave. Ursa stood in the gallery with her hands at her sides and her face composed and utterly still, and Silas stood beside her, and he did not put his hand on hers in front of the court, because he respected her self-possession too much to undercut it, but outside, on the stone steps of the court building in the morning light with the festival market spilling color and noise down the cobblestones below them. He took her hand and held it, and she let him. And Breck stood 3 steps down from them, making a tactful study of the market crowd. "That is one thing done," Ursa said. "Yes," said Silas. "There are other things." Her voice was measured. "The Thornwall Company will take a new contract. Asheville will try again through other means. The fort needs to be garrisoned again, and the Delta needs to be resettled, and there are Mudborn kin scattered to 5 different northern camps who need to know what happened and what is owed." "I know," he said. She turned and looked at him. "That is a lot of road." "I have a mule," he said, "and good boots, and I've been told I'm useful to have around." "You were told correctly," she said, and she was entirely serious when she said it, And the honesty of it, the direct, open fact of it, she found him useful. She wanted him near. She had kissed him on court steps and reached for him in the dark and was now telling him she intended to keep him, hit him somewhere low in the chest with the force of something he had been waiting a long time to feel. The raid came on the 5th night. They had been in Ironbell nearly a week. Vorn was recovering well and would stay with a northern orc trader's family until he could travel properly. Breck had gone that afternoon to meet 2 of the surviving Mudborn warriors who had come south on hearing of the emergency court filing. Silas and Ursa were alone at the Ironbark, in the small room they had shared since the 2nd night, when the sound of boots on the roof told them something was happening that was not festival noise. Ursa was on her feet before the sound fully registered. She had her axe. She slept with it within arm's reach, which Silas had accepted as simply a fact about her. And she was at the door before he had his boots on, pressing herself flat against the wall beside the frame, listening with the concentrated stillness of a very experienced fighter. Silas got his boots on. He did not have a weapon, technically. He had a boot knife which he took out, and he had the particular low-grade stubbornness that had sent him east toward the smoke in the first place, which was not a weapon but would have to do. She held up 2 fingers, then pointed up and to the right, 2 on the roof to the right. She held up 2 more, then pointed at the door, 2 outside the door. He mouthed, "How do you know?" She tapped her ear. "Right, orc hearing." He mouthed, "Oh," and resolved to keep that in mind going forward. They did not have time for more sign language before the door came open with a kick. What happened next was very fast and very loud, and Silas later tried to describe it in terms of music, because it was the only framework he had that adequately handled complexity and simultaneity. 2 men came through the door and immediately ran into the fact that Ursa Mudborn was not where they expected her to be, and by the time their eyes adjusted to the dark, she had already broken the first man's momentum with her shoulder, used his own body as a barrier against the second, and put him down hard enough that the room shook. The second man recovered faster than expected, and Silas, who had been watching the window from the far side of the room, turned and hit him with the only genuinely solid thing in the room, the wooden water basin, because his boot knife was not going to win that particular argument, and the basin was heavy and his aim was good. The man went down. The 2 from the roof came through the window. This was where back-to-back became literal. Ursa turned on the window, and Silas pressed his shoulders to hers, facing the door in case more came, and she was warm and solid and absolutely immovable against his back, and he heard her dealing with the 2 from the window in a series of impacts that sounded like controlled violence, and he held the door and shouted loudly, for the inn, for fire, for help, in the particular carrying voice that 3 years of public performance had developed in him. The inn erupted. The innkeep Hannah, it turned out, kept a crossbow behind the bar and was entirely willing to use it in defense of her establishment, and the sound of her voice from the stairwell and the crossbow bolt that hit the doorframe of the room as a very clear statement of intent sent the remaining attackers. There had been at least 1 more in the hall over the window and into the alley below with considerably more speed than dignity. The room had 4 unconscious men in it. None were dead. Silas was fairly sure of that, though he was also fairly sure at least 2 were going to feel it for a week. He turned. Ursa had a gash on her arm, not deep, but clean, blade-made, and she was breathing the way she had breathed in the camp after the siege, controlled and fast. He caught her eyes. She was steady. "Asheville's men," he said. "Hired hands," she said. "Not Thornwall quality, desperate response." "Desperate is still dangerous." "Yes," she agreed. He crossed the room and took her cut arm and looked at it, and she let him, same as the first time, without protest. He tied it with the linen he kept in his satchel, which lived on the floor beside the bed, and was the most reliable thing in his life. His hands were not shaking, which surprised him slightly, and then he thought about why not and decided it was because she was here and not hurt badly and the room was secured, and that was, for right now, enough. She was watching his face while he bandaged her. "You are not afraid," she said. "I am considerably afraid," he said, tying off the linen. "I'm just busy." "That is a good way to handle it," she said, and she put her free hand on his jaw, cradling it, and he leaned into the touch for just a moment. In the morning they gave their accounts to the town guard, who were deeply interested in 4 unconscious hired men found in a festival inn, and 2 of the men, once separated and questioned, were willing to name their employer for reduced charges, which was a straightforward thing that the magistrate, already familiar with the name, received with the expression of a man who was beginning to find the Asheville file considerably more interesting than he had initially thought. Duran Asheville was not in Iron Bell. He was, his solicitor had confirmed, at his seat on the eastern ridge. The town guard filed a formal notice. Breck, when she heard about the raid the next morning, looked at Silas with the new expression she had been developing since Thornhitch Market, the one that meant he had cleared some bar she had not initially imagined him capable of clearing. "You are useful," she said, which from Breck was practically a speech. "So I've been told," he said. They had been in Iron Bell long enough. The court filing was solid. The magistrate's notice was filed. And the eastern ridge, where Duran Asheville sat in his stone seat and directed his hired cruelties, was a real destination and a real confrontation that could not be settled by staying in a festival town and waiting. On the morning they prepared to leave, Silas settled his traveling gear satchel, loot in its canvas cover, bedroll, and said goodbye to Hannah the innkeep, who pressed a jar of preserved plums on him with the firmness of someone who had made up her mind. He said goodbye to Vorn, who was sitting up in the trader's kitchen eating broth and who caught Silas's arm as he turned to go and said, in careful human tongue, "Thank you for the music." "Thank you for not dying," Silas said sincerely. Vorn almost smiled. Breck was going ahead with 2 of the returned Mudborn warriors, north and then east by the longer safe route, to meet with the scattered northern kin and begin sending word. They would rendezvous east of the ridge in 10 days. That left Silas and Ursa on the Iron Bell Road with Pepper, heading east, alone. The day was clean and cold and the road ahead was long, and they walked the way they had on the second day of the journey from Ashford Close, arms occasionally brushing. The easiness of people who have shared a bedroll and a raided room and a court gallery and a night under stars, and have stopped needing to hold distance because distance was no longer what they wanted. About 2 miles out of town, he started playing and she started talking. She talked about the Delta, what it had been, what her grandmother had built there, what the 43 acres looked like in spring when the flood plain went bright with water birds. She talked about the fort, what it had been used for before the garrison, a way station for the river traders, a place where orc and human commerce had been conducted for 20 years without anyone needing to use an axe. She talked about her mother, who had been the clan's best river trader, and about her father, who had been a fighter and a quiet man, and had died before the siege in a different, smaller violence that the world had simply absorbed and moved past. She talked about what she wanted the Delta to be again, specific and practical and full of the weight of someone who had been thinking about it every day of 11 days inside a siege and had not permitted herself the luxury of stopping. He listened. He played underneath her words, quietly, not to illustrate them but to hold the space, the way good accompaniment holds a melody without competing with it. He was very good at listening. It was possibly his best quality, the thing that made people tell him true things and musicians trust him with their old songs and strangers, give him their stories without quite meaning to. "You're the first human I've talked to this much," she said at some point in the late morning. "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me later." "I'll remember," he said. Around midday, they stopped at a wide flat rock beside the road, a good stopping point, and ate the last of the Iron Bell Market bread and the preserved plums from Hannah, which were excellent. And Silas lay back on the sun-warm rock with his arm under his head and felt the particular physical ease of being outside and well-fed and in good company, and not being raided by hired men, which he was beginning to appreciate as a premium state of being. Ursa sat beside him, cross-legged, looking out at the road ahead, which curved northeast toward the ridge country. The bronze rivets of her leather armor caught the noon light. Her profile against the sky was striking, the strong jaw and the upward curving tusks and the dark hair and the amber eyes, direct and always a little too keen for anyone who expected less from them. "Silas," she said. He said, "when we have done what needs doing at the ridge, when the land is secured and Asheville is answered and the kin are gathered, what will you do?" He opened his eyes. He looked at the sky for a moment. "What do you want me to do?" he said. "That's not an answer," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I wanted to hear yours first." A long pause. The kind she took when she was being careful, not because she was uncertain, but because she was saying something that mattered and wanted to say it right. "I want you to stay," she said. "I don't know what staying looks like for you. I know you are someone who moves, who collects songs from every town between here and the sea, who is not built for standing in one place and watching the same horizon every day. I don't want to ask for something you can't give and find out later it was the wrong question." He sat up. He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the road, which was her version of managing the vulnerability of having said that. "Ursa," he said. She looked at him. "I've been moving for 3 years because standing still felt like being invisible," he said. "Every town, every inn, every room, I am there for a week, and then I am the musician who was here last spring, and then I am gone and no one particularly notices. That is the life I was managing, not the life I wanted." He leaned forward on the rock so their faces were close. "I have been more seen in 1 week with you than in 3 years of stages. You look at me like you're actually interested in what's there. You let me look after you and you look after me and you say my name like you mean it. I'm not in a hurry to go anywhere you're not." Ursa held his gaze for a long, steady moment. "You write songs about moving through the world looking for something," she said. "Yes," he said. "Have you found it?" "Yes," he said. She leaned forward and kissed him, mid-road in the noon light, on the flat warm rock, with Pepper grazing unconcernedly at the verge, and the road empty in both directions and the ridge country blue-green in the distance. And it was different from the court steps kiss in a way that was hard to name, except that it was longer and quieter, and had something in it that was not the beginning of something but the confirmation of it, the moment where what was already real simply agreed to be called by its right name. He put his hands in her hair. She made a sound low in her throat that was not quite language and put her hand flat on his chest, over his heart. His heart, which was doing something embarrassing and entirely genuine. They stayed on the rock longer than was practical, and then they got up and kept walking. The eastern ridge was 3 more days by foot, and the days had weight and movement and life. They talked about everything: music and land rights and history, and the specific problems of traveling with a mule in winter and orc clan naming customs, and the river orc saying about giving up what you love, and whether it was sad or practical, and what songs she had heard growing up, which were different from his border songs but had some of the same roots, like 2 rivers fed by the same mountains. She told him the orc custom of the naming claim, that when a Mudborn warrior claimed a companion, a partner, they gave them a name in the clan tongue, a second name that meant something specific. It was not a ceremony, she explained. It was not formal. It was done when it was meant and not before. "What would mine be?" he asked, and immediately felt like it was too much to ask. But she did not flinch. She thought about it genuinely, turning it over while they walked. Then she said it 2 syllables in the Mudborn dialect, a sound like river water, and struck bronze at once, and she told him it meant, roughly, the one who looks and stays, the one who sees and does not leave. He walked beside her for a few steps in silence, feeling what that was in his chest, and then he said, "I'll answer to it." "I know," she said. "You already do." On the 3rd day before the ridge, they came through a high pass between 2 great bare gray hills, and the road turned, and the eastern ridge country opened below them, wide and green, and sectioned by stone walls, with the delta visible far south like a silver seam in the land. And Ursa stopped walking and stood at the top of the pass and looked at it. He stood beside her. He did not say anything. He could feel her breathing change, the way it did when something was big enough that she had to allow herself to feel it. "It's still there," she said. "Of course it's still there," he said. "It was waiting." She reached sideways without looking at him and took his hand, and he held it, and they stood at the top of the pass in the wind and looked at the land spread below them, her land, her people's land, the 43 acres and the water rights and the ruin of what had been done, and the possibility of what could be rebuilt. He thought, "I'm going to write a song about this exact moment, and it is going to be the best thing I have ever written, and I am never going to play it for an in-crowd because this one belongs only to this place, and this woman and this particular quality of standing still when you have been moving towards something for a long time." He might have told her as much, because she looked at him with those amber eyes and said, "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I've been looking for a horizon worth stopping at," he said. "I think I found it." She squeezed his hand hard and then started down the pass, pulling him with her. Getting Duran Asheville to answer for what he had done was not simple, and it was not fast, and it was not without danger. The confrontation at his ridge seat was not a battle. Silas was clear-eyed enough to know that 5 orcs and a musician with a boot knife were not the instrument of military justice. But Ursa's plan had never been military. The legal filing, the magistrate's court, the formal notice, the 2 hired men who had named Asheville in the Iron Bell guard room. These were threads that, when pulled, made the fabric of Asheville's position unravel in the plain daylight where everyone could see it. They met Breck and the northern kin 2 miles east of the ridge. 6 Mudborn warriors, 2 of them older, with the marks of clan elders, who greeted Ursa with an embrace that she permitted for exactly the right length of time, and who looked at Silas with the measuring expression that every Mudborn seemed to use on first assessment, and then apparently updated, because the eldest elder, a woman named Gore whose hair was entirely silver and who had the bearing of someone who had made many decisions and had mostly been right, looked at Silas for a long time and then said something in the Mudborn dialect. Ursa, at his side, translated without inflection. "She says you are small for your kind, but you hold correctly." "I'll take it," Silas said. Gore said something else. Ursa's face did something brief and complicated. "She says you hold like a person who has been found, not like a person who is searching." He looked at Ursa. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything to each other about that, because some things are large enough that saying them out loud is redundant. The confrontation with Asheville was, in practical terms, 3 things. It was the delivery of the magistrate's formal notice to Asheville's steward at the ridge seat gate, with Breck and 2 of the northern warriors present as witnesses, in a quiet outdoor moment in the stone courtyard of the estate that was watched by a handful of Asheville's own servants, who understood very clearly what a magistrate's seal meant. It was Ursa, standing in the public road outside the ridge seat gate, speaking directly to the gathered servants, and the few travelers who stopped because a green-skinned warrior woman in bronze-riveted leather making a formal declaration in the public road is something that stops traffic, speaking clearly and specifically about the siege, about the deed, about the court filing, about the hired men who had given names, about the 37 dead. She did not threaten. She did not grandstand. She spoke facts with the precision of someone who had learned that the most devastating form of witness is the one that does not need to raise its voice. Silas stood beside her the entire time. When she finished, and the courtyard and the road were very quiet, he stepped forward and said, in the carrying voice he used for full performance in a crowded room, "My name is Silas Holloway. I am a witness. I will travel every town on the Ashford Road, and I will tell this story in every inn from here to Coldmere, and I will sing it, and people will remember it because that is what I do." He meant every word. Duran Asheville's solicitor, who was visible in the courtyard and had been listening, turned and went inside. The estate gate closed. It was not the end. Justice in the border country was slow and required sustained pressure and sometimes circled back on itself before it moved forward. But the Thornwall Company, when their contract payment was formally held pending the court investigation, declined to pursue further action. Asheville contested the land deed through the court and lost at the preliminary review. The formal case dragged into the winter, but the deed stood, and the delta, vacant and damaged but still there, still lawfully Mudborn, remained so. In the weeks around the confrontation and the court process, Silas played. He played every town on the Ashford Road, as he had promised. He played the story, not as an accusation in musical form, but as a real song, the song about broken stone and amber eyes and 36 dead, and the one woman who stood in the middle of the wreckage with an axe and survived on sheer rage and was still there. He played it in the Hinge at Ashford Town and in the Iron Bell Festival stage, where someone in the back of the room started crying, and in every way station and inn and Trader's Fire between them, and people listened, and people talked, and the story moved the way stories do when they carry truth inside them, further and faster than any solicitor's brief. Ursa heard him play it once in the full version at a Thornhitch market stall where he had been asked back by the market keeper. She stood at the edge of the crowd and listened from start to finish, and when it ended she waited until the crowd had dispersed before she came to him. "You wrote the whole thing," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is accurate," she said. "I know," he said. "I was there." She stood very close to him in the market yard. "The part about the water," she said. "What about it?" "You say it like it was everything." "It was," he said. "You didn't refuse it. Everything after that, everything good that happened after that is because you didn't refuse it." She looked at him for a long time. Then she put her hands on either side of his face and kissed him in the market yard, in front of whoever was watching, with absolutely no concern for who was watching, which was a very Ursa thing to do, and he kissed her back with no concern for anything at all. The winter came early to the border country that year, and the road between the ridge and the delta was cold and difficult, and they spent more nights than Silas had planned in borrowed shelter and roadside camps. He was not ungrateful for this. Borrowed shelter with Ursa was warm in all the ways that mattered, and the nights were long and they filled them with conversation and music, and the particular quiet of two people who have stopped negotiating the terms of their closeness and simply live inside it. And Silas began to fill new pages in his songbook with things he had never written before, things that were not about moving through places looking for something, but about being somewhere, being with someone. The specific texture and weight of days that were genuinely his. The Delta reclamation was a project of months, not weeks. The Mudborn kin came south through the winter in careful stages. Some structures still stood. The water rights were affirmed by a river surveyor the magistrate sent in February. A meticulous human woman who went up and down the waterway for 4 days with a rod and a compass, and came back with documents that made the Mudborn claim to the water as solid as the claim to the land. There was a great deal of clearing and building and mending, and Silas was not a builder or a carpenter, but he was a person with steady hands and willingness to learn and a mule who could pull a load, and he was useful in the ways available to him, and he did not apologize for the limitations or oversell the skills. He played most evenings, in the camp or later in the first rebuilt shelter, and the kin came to sit around it the way the survivors had sat around it in the hollow under the fern-covered rock. And Gore the elder told him that in the Mudborn tradition a fire singer was an honored person, someone who carried the clan's memory in their throat, and that in the old days every war band had one. "I'm not a war band singer," Silas said. "No," Gore agreed in careful human tongue. "You are a clan singer." "Different, better." She said something else in the dialect. "She says you are the voice of the people who survived," Ursa translated. "That is the highest thing she can call you." He turned the songbook over in his hands and felt, for the first time in his life, that it was not just a collector's record, that it was something with a purpose and a home. On the first warm day of late winter, when the frost was still on the ground in the early morning but the noon sun had real heat in it, Silas and Ursa walked the boundary of the 43 acres together. She knew every marker, every stone post, every ancient tree that served as a corner. She told him what had been here before and what she intended to build here, and how long she thought it would take, realistic and specific. And he walked beside her and asked questions and remembered the answers. At the north boundary where the land touched the river, they stopped. The river was high with snowmelt, running fast and bright. "Everything good belongs to the river," he said. She looked at him. "You remembered that." "I remember everything you teach me," he said. She faced the river for a moment. Then she turned to him and said in the measured, careful voice she used for things that mattered, "You could have gone anywhere after Iron Bell, the road south, the Coldmere Festival in spring. Any in between here and the sea, you chose to stay." "I'm not choosing to stay," he said. "I'm choosing to be here. There's a difference. Staying feels like giving something up. Being here is what I want." He looked at the river, then at her. "Besides, I have songs to write. The Delta is going to give me material for years." Her mouth curved. "Is that why you're here, material?" "You're my material," he said. "You have been since the moment I saw you standing in that camp with an axe, covered in siege dust, surviving on nothing but sheer rage. I knew then you were going to be a song I never stopped writing." Ursa looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to face him fully and reached into the collar of her leather armor and pulled out a thin cord, braided dark leather, from which hung a single small bronze ring, not decorative, functional, a piece of her own armor's rivet work, small and warm, and exactly the color of her amber eyes in the right light. "This is a Mudborn thing," she said. "When a warrior names a companion and means to keep them, they give something from their armor, something they have carried into battle. It means I have fought with this in my hands, and I am now putting it in yours." She held it out. He looked at the cord, the bronze ring, the work of her own hands repurposed into this. He understood what it was. He took it carefully and put it around his neck and tucked it inside his shirt, against his skin. "Thank you," he said, and that was the whole answer, and she accepted it as such. She kissed him then, standing at the river boundary, with the snowmelt running fast and cold beside them, and the 43 acres of the southern delta spread behind them, and the clan camp visible 200 yards back, and the whole weight of what had been done and survived and built and chosen settling into something clear and stable. He held her, and she let him, and she held him back. Months later, when the first structures of the rebuilt Mudborn settlement were standing, 2 long hall houses, a river dock, a smoke shed, a store for the coming summer's trade, Silas Holloway packed his satchel again. He packed it the way he always had. 30-odd copper coins, a length of linen for bandaging, a hard wheel of cheese from the Delta's first trade, and his songbook, which was running out of pages and would need a new volume by the time they hit Coldmere. Ursa packed hers. Belt axe, travel leathers, the emergency vellum compartment now empty and sewn shut, her share of the kin's trade coin, a map she had made herself of the northern road with new notes in the margins. Breck stood at the hall house door with her arms crossed and an expression that was her version of warmth, which involved no visible warmth but a great deal of solid, permanent approval. "Do not get killed," she said, specifically to Silas. "I'll do my best," he said. "She will protect you," Breck said. "It is embarrassing how much she will protect you. I have told her this." "I have explained to Breck," Ursa said from beside Silas, without looking up from adjusting her pack, "that there is nothing embarrassing about being sure of something." Said Breck, which, in Breck's language, was acceptance. Gore the elder came out to the road with them. She spoke in the Mudborn dialect, looking at them both, and Ursa translated in quiet fragments. "Go well, carry the name, come home between the going, because going and home are not the same thing, and a clan singer walks between them, and that is good. That is how the stories travel. That is how the living know the dead are still counted." Silas felt the bronze ring against his chest. "We'll come home," he said, and meant both things, the Delta and each other. Gore touched his face with one weathered hand briefly, and turned back to the settlement. They set out east, then north, then northwest, the long road that went through Thornhitch and Ashford Town and the way station where the road split toward Coldmere in the west and the sea towns in the north. Pepper was rested and cooperative, which meant he was only occasionally obstinate. The road was clear and the morning was young and the horizon was wide. They walked close, his arm against hers, the lute on his back and her axe at her belt, and the road ahead offering everything that roads offer. The next town, the next fire, the next crowd of strangers who would be less strange by the end of the evening, the next song, the next story. "Where first?" Silas said. "Coldmere for the spring festival," Ursa said. "I have contacts there, Mudborn traders. They will want news of the Delta." She paused. "And there is a festival stage. You need a new stage." "I have 17 new songs," he said. "I need 17 new stages." "Then we will find 17, she said, entirely matter of fact, as if this was simply a logistics problem and she was going to solve it, which was, he thought, exactly and perfectly correct. He pulled out the lute, slung it forward, and started playing as they walked. The new song, the one that didn't have a name yet, the one that was about all of this, the road and the delta and the siege and the water and the naming cord and the market yard kiss and the river boundary and the bronze ring, came out of his fingers in pieces, finding its shape, the way all the best ones did. Not finished yet, but there, definitely there. Ursa walked beside him on the road that led away from the settlement and toward the horizon, her stride easy and her amber eyes forward and her dark hair loose in the morning wind. And every now and then she looked at him sidelong with those steady eyes and the full curve of that fierce and asymmetric smile, and he played for her, and for the road, and for everyone they hadn't met yet. She had survived the siege on sheer rage, and he had handed her water, and she had not refused it. And from that small, unremarkable human kindness, a waterskin extended across 30 yards of wreckage to a woman still holding an axe, the whole of this had grown. The filing and the festival and the midnight raid and the court steps and the stars and the boundary of 43 acres and the bronze ring and the name that meant the one who looks and stays. He looked. He stayed. She kept him. They walked east into the morning together, on the road that went everywhere, and now, for the first time in his wandering life, also went home.